You're all good. So, good morning, friends. Welcome to my talk on lean communication. I'm Mandar Malunjkar. I'll provide more details about myself in the next slide, but today I'm here to talk about lean communication. Now, by nature, lean is all about cutting waste. We want to make sure that whatever we do, be it communication, be it any of the processes that we have at our workplace, we cut the waste. We keep it to the minimum. So, like I said, by nature, lean is all about... Bring that up a little higher. No? All right, is this better? Oh yeah, I can hear myself. So let's do this again. Going back to what I was talking about, lean communication is all about cutting waste in your communication. Before we do a deep dive, let me talk about a little bit about myself. I am Mandar Malunjkar. I have the privilege to lead a team of talented developers at Alliance Data. I'm also the co-founder of coinscore.co. We are trying to do some cool things in the blockchain and Bitcoin space. More on that maybe later. I'm also a polyglot dev. I'm an agilist, and I'm an avid traveler. If you ask me what's my best vacation, I'll tell you it's the next one, because I'm always looking forward to my next vacation. A little bit about Alliance Data. We are a Fortune 500 company. We are publicly listed on NYSE, and we provide the service of credit cards. So if I were to talk a little more about Alliance Data, we are the brand behind the brands. We are a customer-centric marketing loyalty company, and we have a sponsor booth here today. And if you would be very kind, we are just right around the corner. Do visit us later on. So let's do a quick deep dive into what lean communication is. And I'm going to start with a quick poll. Raise your hand if you've ever been in a meeting that went on for too long, or if you've ever received an email that is more like an essay or a thesis. Everyone? I believe so, yeah? It happens more often than you would imagine. It is just the nature of the beast. We are just used to write long emails. We are used to have email conversation. So my talk is today going to focus on some of the tips and tricks which will hopefully help you take care of such things in your workplace. So what's in it for you guys as an audience? Today, I will be talking about the need for lean communication. I'll also be touching on a few tips and tricks, as I said, but more importantly, I won't be talking about any things that are too visionary, things that you cannot use. My hope is to give this crowd a few things that you all could go back and implement in your workplace starting Monday. So that's kind of my goal. And the other goal is also to learn from this group, because it's a big audience, and I'm sure there are a lot of good ideas that are sitting with you guys here. It is also not specific to IT. If you're in any sort of work organization or workplace, you would be able to use these tricks. And it's definitely not about blockchain. I can talk about blockchain till the cows come home, but that's for later. And this is not specific to Agile environment. Communication just doesn't happen in Agile environment, so that's one other thing to note. So let's understand the need for lean communication. I saw pretty much everyone in the room raise their hand, so they understand the problem. They already know what's going on in their workplace. So let me ask you guys this question. While you are at this conference, how many emails do you think are piling up in your inbox? 100? 200? I'd request not check your phone instinctively. Let's wait till Monday to find out. We spend too much time checking email, checking our phone, looking at what's happening. We are not present. Very rarely we focus on things that are currently going on. And that's one of the problems with communication. Too much. And I'll touch upon some of these things. We'll talk about how less is more. We'll talk about attention span, and we'll do some math. Don't worry, I've already done the math. This is just an example. So in today's world, both personal and business correspondence has drifted sharply away from in-person communication. We typically write emails, and as pretty much everyone here has agreed that those emails are far too long, we don't prefer a quick touch base, we don't prefer an in-person conversation. We need to cut down on this waste. That's the lean part that's coming in. Now, this is what I typically do. If I have a conversation, or if I have a point that I need to convey, I prefer an in-person conversation. And you guys would believe it or not, too long did not read is a real thing. I mean, I do this, and no offense if you are Facebook friends with me, but I would typically just scroll through Facebook, like a status or a post without completely reading it. So I'm sure a lot of us do that here. I don't want you guys to admit that we do this, but that's just the nature of how we are. So the age-old cliche of less is more applicable than ever in today's day and age, given how connected we are with our phones, with our laptops, with everything that's within fingertips or within an arm's reach. The need for lean communication is more obvious than ever. I'd like to ask you guys a question. Have you ever wondered why Twitter had a 280 character limit for the longest time, or they had 140 and then they moved to 240? Have you guys ever wondered why? Possibly, yeah. That's my take on it. I think being kind of curt, or not curt, but being short is something that just has been ingrained into our minds since the explosion of social media. I think brevity is the key to lean communication. Like I showed on the previous slide, too long did not read is the real thing. You don't want your readers or the audience to fall asleep like that cat, which I had in the previous slide. Now, one quick fact: after Twitter increased their character limit to 280, only 5% of the tweets that were sent out were more than 140 characters. So between the launch of Twitter and the time they changed or increased the character limit, people had just gotten used to using 140 characters. Again, brevity is the key. We want to get our point across in smallest possible way, or the quickest possible manner. And next slide, I'll talk about why. Again, given how connected we are, we have attention span of a goldfish, and that is really true. And for those who probably have not read up on this, goldfish has an attention span of 8 seconds. Literally, you have to remind goldfish as to what you were chatting with a goldfish, assuming you can chat with a goldfish, literally every 8 seconds. Imagine that. And that's kind of what has happened to our attention span in today's day and age. Our attention span is so short, I'm worried that I may have lost some of you already. Let's do a little bit of math to kind of wake us up. So, can you guys guess what this represents? 750, and I'm going to try use the laser pointer. Hopefully it works. No. So, 750 is the number of words that a human brain can process every minute. 600 is typically the number of words that a human being can speak every minute. So if you're having a one-on-one conversation, there's that 150 words delta that I call is the spare bandwidth that is just available. What that does is it makes our mind drift. We typically start thinking about what's for lunch. We start thinking about what we have for lunch or something else. We daydream. We even kind of imagine things, and that's typical human brain. It's nobody's fault. We've been evolved in a manner where we could process a lot more than what we typically get. And later on, I will share a tip on how to control such a thing in a team setting. Like I said earlier on, I'm hoping to provide a few tips and tricks as a part of this talk. Alright, now that we've covered the need for lean communication, let's move over to tips and tricks that would help you communicate in a leaner manner at your workplace. So we'll talk about 5 tips and tricks today. We'll talk about show it, We will talk about 5 emails rule. We'll talk about mind maps, which I believe a lot of people here would be familiar with. We'll talk about jellyfish, which is one of my favorite topics that I have implemented, or tricks that I've implemented at my workplace. And we'll also talk about bottom line upfront. All right. So moving on to the first one. By show of hands, who here has assembled a furniture from IKEA? I know a lot of people have, yeah? I think the guys at IKEA have nailed it. They've figured out how to communicate very crisply. They've figured out how to get the message across in a very quick way. And the other thing that helps them, in my opinion, a lot is they don't have to worry about translation. Imagine IKEA trying to produce or trying to create furniture, and then when they're packing the furniture, which is supposed to go to US versus Mexico versus any place in Europe, they don't have to worry about translation, or they don't have to worry about getting the right leaflet in the right package. They just ship it, the pictures do the talking. So first tip I have is show what you have to communicate. A lot of us are visual people. I don't know if anyone has heard about VAK assessment. I would highly recommend taking that assessment. VAK stands for visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, and that's one kind of way of figuring out what your either co-workers or your spouse or significant other is like, and how do they process information. Moving on to the next one. All right, so this is something I've personally implemented on one of my teams, and I don't really see all of my teammates here, but some of them are here at this conference, and this is a problem I had on my team, and I'm sure you guys have this too. This is typical for teams that are not co-located, but can also happen for teams who are physically in the same location. Let me define the problem. Someone on my team would start an email conversation. A simple question, a simple idea. They would of course send it to the entire team, and then my team members would do reply all. And I wish we had not developed the reply all button, but it's there. So people have started using reply all button, and on my team they would do reply all day long. I would go to meetings, I'd come back, and there'd be 20 emails in my inbox that are all about the same topic, but they would not have any conclusion. People would still be throwing around ideas. They'd be still talking about what if we do this, what if we do that, things like that. What I did, and this is back when I worked as a Scrum Master on my team, I pulled my team aside in one of our retros. We talked about this problem where we just had a lot of email noise going back and forth. And the rule, the team norm, if I may, that we came up with was no more than 5 reply alls. And that's something that my team agreed on, and I'm hoping this is something that you can take back to your teams and use. Now, that doesn't mean that if there is no conclusion, there is no solution by the end of 5 email reply alls, you just drop the topic. What we said is the 6th email or reply all would better be a meeting invite. Set up a quick touch base, get people together, because it's really difficult to understand a topic asynchronously. You'd have people reading through an email, reading through a long email more often than not, and they won't understand. They won't understand what's being conveyed. They would struggle, they'll have their own version of what is being said, and next thing you know, everyone has different ideas about what is being discussed. So that's one rule I've implemented, and that's one other reason why I think stand-ups, for those who practice Agile here, I think stand-ups are one of the most effective team meetings of the day. Folks I know here who practice stand-up on a daily basis could probably vouch for it. It's 15 minutes, it time box. We don't usually try to go over, we try to stay within that 15 minutes, and we speak to specific agenda. We just don't ramble in a stand-up. So to me, that is the reason stand-ups are most effective, because they are lean, they are very crisp, they are very short, and that's how they are designed to be. Moving on to the next one, and mind maps. So one other technique, anybody here has used mind maps? I'm sure I'll get a lot of people who have used mind maps. Yeah. So mind maps is one technique to get your point across quickly. Mind map is a diagram that represents tasks, words, concepts, or items that are linked kind of logically together in a non-linear fashion. As you can see here on the slide, you could have a topic, which is your primary subject. You could have an idea associated with the topic, a sub-idea, a solution. It's just how our brains think. We are wired to think in this way. And what I found is taking notes using mind map is really effective. Any conference I go to, I would typically use mind map to take notes. It's just easy to remember rather than writing down a lot when a speaker is running through his or her slides. There are a lot of tools. There are a lot of Chrome plugins, and later on in the resources slide, I will give you a hint on what those are that would help you create mind maps. If nothing, just use a good old pen and paper, and you can still write those or create those. The next slide I have is on bottom line upfront. So one other way to be brief in your communication is to tell like they do it on a newspaper story. You tell the headline, you talk about the headline first. I was chatting with one of my colleagues regarding this, and he described this as an alternative way of summarizing like to an executive. When you're speaking to someone higher up, you just need to give them the quick bullets. You need to help them understand what the core message is. And it also helps you as well as a speaker, as a person who's going to communicate that message to the other individual. When you're thinking about talking or communicating the bottom line up front, you're also thinking about the concept, what is the core message, and that helps you put together a good summary in place. Now, the other benefit to the listener is once they have heard enough, once they have received the message, they can ask you that yes, they have received it, they understand what the topic that you're trying to convey, and move on. Now, I'll tell you one thing, practice this. I do not want you guys to barge into your boss's office on Monday and tell them that you're going to miss a deadline or you're going to have some issue with the delivery. That may not go well. So just practice it on something non-critical and then take it from there. The next tip I have is something again I've practiced on my team, and I'm happy to share this. For those who've probably read up on jellyfishes, you may know this. Jellyfish are simple creatures, organisms that do not have brain. What they typically do is they just drift, or usually a school of jellyfish, a group of jellyfish would just drift along the ocean currents. They don't usually use their brain as such. They don't have a brain to kind of pick a direction. They just drift along. And one of my teams had this problem. That team had one, maybe two people who had a very strong voice. What that did is that allowed them to take any meeting, any team conversation into a different direction. Without them realizing it, they would speak up and others would just go into the corner. That's a problem. As you can imagine, in a team, we need ideas. We need everyone to speak up. We need cross-pollination of thoughts. We don't need one or two people speaking up and dominating an entire conversation. So how did I solve this? I used jellyfish. As I stated earlier on, jellyfish are a bunch of animals or organisms which do not have any brain. So what I did is, again, I pulled my team together in a retro, said, hey guys, here's a problem and here's a solution that we have. Let's see if this works for us. And solution was use jellyfish as what I call as almost a safe word, if I may. Anytime anyone on the team or in a team meeting or team setting felt that we are drifting away from the agenda. Drifting is the key word here. Drifting mindlessly, drifting without using our brains into a completely different direction. Then they could just use jellyfish as the word. There was more of a polite way of interjecting, saying, hey guys, I think we are being jellyfishes here, which essentially talks about how we are, or which essentially indicates how we are drifting away from the agenda. So if your team has this problem, I would recommend getting your team together, talking about this problem, and then say, hey, can we agree on a word? It need not be jellyfish. I have nothing in favor of or against jellyfish. You guys can, make a fun activity out of it. You can pick your own word, but this is just one word that worked in my situation. And that was the last tip I had to share with this group. Let's quickly kind of talk about wrapping this up. As I bring this to closure, a quick recap of what we talked about. We talked about what is lean communication. We talked about how we could cut waste, be lean in our communication, get the point across in a crispier manner, be brief. We also talked about the short attention span, goldfish. We also talked about TLDR, too long did not read. And we are so efficient these days that we would not even bother writing. Too long did not read. We have developed an acronym for that, TL semicolon DR, right? That's why emojis are a big thing. We want to communicate in very small words. We also talked about how our brain uses the spare capacity that it has. Again, it's nobody's fault. We are wired to take in 750. We typically get about 600 words. Now, again, if you ask my wife, I'm sure she'll tell you I can speak a lot more than 600 words, but that's for later. That's for a later talk. And one other thing, or two other things that we talked about, and these are my favorites, is the reply all rule. If you guys have that problem at your workspace, I recommend getting your team together, and of course, jellyfish, which is one of those words that my team could come up with that just jived with all of us, because it talks about drifting and it talks about drifting mindlessly. If anyone in the audience has any suggestion or any thought of around this, I'd love to hear them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. Sure. Let me back up to the slide and I'll probably jump through that slide. Yeah. So typically, mind map would revolve around a central concept. You would have, say, we will take this talk as the subject. We'll talk about lean communication. The ideas or thoughts that would be linked to this mind map would be just what jives with you, what you can remember, or what will help you remember, implement this concept or this topic. One of the subtopics or the ideas or tips and tricks could be jellyfish, could be the reply all rule, could be the need. Typically, and I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. I'm sure everyone here has heard from him. He's a good speaker on you typically find his talks on TED.com. He usually would talk about start with the why. So first thing, maybe talk about why do we need this? What's the waste that we are trying to cut down on? That's a very good question. It's whatever works for your team. We felt that we had 5 or 6 team members, so we wanted to give each and any one of them give a chance, saying, okay, send one email at least to try to bring this to a closure. But there's no magic to it. It can be 2. Yes, and typically on an agile team, which what I had back then, and I had a group of devs, there were 5 developers. Typically, you would have a group of dev and QA, and your team size would be somewhere between 5 to 7. But there's no magic to it. It could be 5, it could be 6. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. So the original question was there any reason I picked up 5 reply alls and not anything other than 5? So like I said, there's no magic to it. It's just something that my team and we discussed, like we all together discussed as a group, and that was it. Any other thoughts, any other questions that anybody from the audience has to share? Yeah.
I don't know if you did this on purpose, but you almost structured your presentation as a mind map. If you go back to the overall, you have the main subject, the different.
I'm glad you noticed. Yes, indeed. If you look through, and I'm going to flip back a few slides, He said, I don't know if I noticed that I've structured my presentation like a mind map, and that is very true. If I go back here, I have the tips and tricks as my core idea, and then it leads me to show it, 5 email rule, mind map, jellyfish, and bottom line upfront. So yes, that is very true. All right.
From a show perspective,
Mhm.
I mean, is it something where you typically find it more visual, like or an actual demonstration of the show? You can kind of elaborate on that a little
Sure.
bit?
So as I said earlier on, there are different ways we learn. There is VAK, we talked about visual, we talked about auditory, and we talked about kinesthetic. Some people learn by doing things. They actually have to build something. They actually have to put 2 pieces of Legos together to learn how that's done. Some people would just watch and they learn. Some people would just hear that, oh yeah, you just put these 2 pieces together and it works. So going back to your earlier point, Show It is specifically catered to people who are more visual. And the way I have done it is either use just a whiteboard to convey the idea. We do get smart whiteboards where we could just draw whatever we'd like and then email that picture out. Or you can always use your phone. I have one person here who introduced me to an app called Microsoft Lens, who, I don't know if you guys have heard about that, but it typically, if you take a picture and you end up taking that picture at an angle, it will change the angle for you, so it will appear as if you've taken it right up front, which definitely helps if you're trying to keep notes. Right, if there are no other questions, I would like to leave you with some resources that you could use to do some further reading on. I've used some of these. There's a good book I'll recommend called Brief. It's a book by Joseph McCormack. It's a pretty decent book. I recommend reading it through. And these slides would be available on a SharePoint or shared drive somewhere, right? Okay, all right. So they will be available for you all to look at. And to conclude, I'd like to thank you all for joining to this conversation on lean communication. I do not want to make you guys hangry by being the one person between you and lunch. I do understand this session, as it happens even in last year, even at last year's conference, my session was just before lunch. But I do appreciate everyone for taking time to kind of hear me talk about lean communication. And if you have any ideas, any thoughts to share, I'll stay back here. You can always use our Slack channel to send questions over. And if you could be very kind, you could always visit us at the Alliance Data booth, which is just around the corner. All right. Thank you, everyone.